We're back now with John Legend. John, great to have you with us again.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This has obviously been an incredibly trying time for all of us. We've heard over the last couple of hours some really powerful perspectives on forging a path forward. And I wanted to ask you, what gives you hope? What gives you and your family hope? How do you stay hopeful?
Well, I think hope is something that I've always had, and I've always believed that we can do better, and we can summon the best of our human power to make the world better. It's hard sometimes to feel hope though, because right now we're seeing a lot of people dying, we're seeing a lot of tragedy, we're seeing a lot of preventable tragedy as well. But I do believe in the human spirit. I believe that America and the world are comprised of a lot of people who care about each other and care about making the world better. A lot of really brilliant people, scientists, doctors, people working in the medical field, a lot of people who are thinking about how we come back from this and come back in a way that is better than what we were before, not just normal, but is stronger and smarter than we were before. I think a lot of people are thinking about that, and there are always going to be forces that try to drag us back and that are reactionary. But I think there are a lot of great folks out there thinking about how we learn from this situation and become stronger. And if we try our best to summon the best of our human energy and spirit and ingenuity toward making a better future, I think we can do that.
I think you make a great point. A time of crisis is also a time to think about change. And I'm wondering, you've been so active, particularly in the areas of mass incarceration and voting rights expansion. How are you thinking about change that might come out of this crisis in those areas, positive or negative, particularly as we approach a major election?
Well, I think one of the areas we are very concerned about, of course, is the election itself and whether or not people can safely vote. And fortunately, I think a lot of people have been thinking about this for a while. People like Stacey Abrams with her Fair Fight organization and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which I'm part of the board of. There are organizations that have been out there fighting diligently and sometimes outside of the spotlight to make sure that people have their right to vote and that they know their rights and that they're informed about the restrictions that are being put in their way and finding ways to make sure that they vote despite those obstacles. And so we're going to fight this year to make sure that with this additional crisis, with this additional impediment of worrying about whether or not we can even be close to each other, that we make sure we get the maximal voter participation that we can. And I think a lot of us are fighting for no excuse absentee balloting and early voting so that people can spread out the times during which they vote and make sure we can do it safely, because we've seen even in Milwaukee that some people got sick from voting in the last Wisconsin election. And that should not be the sacrifice we're asking citizens to take to exercise what is a fundamental right of them being citizens of the United States. So that's one issue. We've been talking a bit about what's happening in our prisons and jails. Yes. And a lot of people think, well, these folks committed crimes, so maybe they should be lower priority. But please understand that those people are almost by definition prohibited from social distancing, and they're also around folks that are going back home every day to their families, corrections officers, other staff members that work in the jails and prisons. And so it's been a hotbed for a lot of infections because so many people are so close to each other and the conditions already aren't the best for them. And some of these folks are not, murderers and rapists. I think a lot of people are like, well, if there are a bunch of murderers and rapists in there, then let them, get sick. We don't care. But folks are in jails and prisons for all kinds of reasons. And some of them are only going to be there or only scheduled to be there for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And that should not carry with it a death sentence or the potential for a death sentence by being infected with this virus because they're so close to everyone else. So we need to think very carefully about who we really need to have in our jails and prisons to keep us safe. And those who aren't a risk to safety in our communities, we need to make them safe and make it safe for the corrections officers working with them as well. So that's another issue we need to think about. But these are things we've been talking about for a long time. Changing bail policy, changing incarceration policy, so we don't lock so many people up for so long to begin with. But once again, I think this crisis is exposing some of the flaws in our society that already existed. We've seen it with healthcare coverage and the expense of healthcare. We've seen it with so many other issues with the social safety net, where all it takes is an event like this to really expose these things. But these were issues prior to this crisis, and we need to think about how we reform our society so that we can better be prepared for the next crisis, but also so that the new normal is better than the old normal.
It's exposing the cracks in our system, as Angelina Jolie put it a little earlier. You called on Governor Cuomo to release nonviolent offenders and take more action to protect people in prisons through this crisis. Have you heard back from him? Are you encouraged at all by the response to that call?
We've seen some movement in New York. I haven't personally heard back from him, but multiple artists and activists have been speaking up on behalf of our folks in our jails and prisons. And I think there's been some movement in New York, but I think there could be a lot more. And you have to understand that part of the backdrop of this is something we fought for last year, which was reforming the laws in the state of New York to dramatically reduce the use of money bail and to give more pre-trial protections for people who are accused of crimes. When we talk about bail, I think a lot of people kind of assume that these folks are criminals and that they've been proven to be criminals, but bail is something that is charged to people when they're accused of a crime. And in our country, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And a lot of our jails are filled with people who haven't been convicted of any crime. They're suspected of committing a crime. They're possibly accused of it, but the state hasn't proven that they're guilty. And we're locking them up because they can't afford to go home. And you'll know the difference when, for instance, Harvey Weinstein was accused of rape. He was charged a bail that he could afford, and he went home. He did not sit in the jail, but there are a lot of folks that because of their financial situation, they're not treated the same way. And you should not be able to buy justice in America. It should be something that's fair for everybody. But folks who are poor and struggling, even if they're charged, $1,000, they don't have that sitting around waiting for them to, be able to pay these amounts. And so many of our jails and prisons, particularly our county jails, are filled with folks who have been accused but have not been convicted and just can't afford to go back home.
I'd love to bring in a question from our audience. This is from Lisa here in the US, and she says, a question for you. I'm an artist. I'm mentally drained, but also creatively fueled. Is it our responsibility as artists to produce right now or rest? What do you think? What role do artists have to play in this moment?
I think every artist is going to have to decide what they are inspired to do and what they can do. But I got to imagine that there's going to be a lot of creativity that comes from this time because people have some time to reflect and the world is slowed down in a lot of ways for them. And that could spark some interesting ideas, whether you're a writer or a painter or whatever it is. This time may be a time where you can create more. Of course, when you have kids like we do, being home doesn't necessarily mean you can get a lot more work done. I like to go off and write. I like to go to the studio and write. I like to be in another place. And so there may be some challenges when it comes to that, because if you're at home and you've got kids and you've got a family to take care of, you might not have the free time that it might seem that one would have if they couldn't go anywhere.
I'm right there with you.
Exactly.
3, 9, and 11. For parents glad you raised that. For parents who are looking for activities with their kids, how long does it take to plan a wedding for 2 stuffed animals? Just asking for a friend.
That was a couple. That was a brilliant idea by Chrissy, inspired by our daughter Luna, and we put it together pretty quickly. The hardest part was just putting the rocks in order on the deck to make sure the aisle looked nice. That was my job.
That's great.
And it was fun. We're just trying to entertain our kids, and I think they love it because they just like being with us a lot, and they're not at the age where they want to be with their friends more than they want to be with their parents, because they're 4 and 2 and almost 2. So they're not really missing their friends that much. They're excited to be with their parents so much. But I think once they get a little older, they'll probably miss their friends more and not think we're as cool as they think we are now. But for the time being, they are in heaven, hanging out with mom and dad.
I have it on both ends. One who thinks it's cool to be with his parents, and one and maybe a half who are ready to get out. I know you're going to do one more song for us, which is the title track from your new album, Bigger Love. And you described it as a celebration of love, resilience, and hope. These talks and the issue that preceded it, the issue of time preceded it, the theme is finding hope. Powerful message for this moment. You must have sensed it coming at some level, or what was it?
It's crazy because I wrote it last year and I didn't know the circumstances under which I'd be releasing it, but here we are. And I think people could use a little shot of hope and love and a moment to dance as well. I'm going to be playing it on the piano, so it won't be as beat driven and danceable as the record is, but hopefully people get a chance to play the record. And I think it's a fun record. My kids like to dance to it, and hopefully it'll inspire some dance breaks in your homes all around the world.
Well, I can't wait to hear it. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll let you have the last words of this program in music. No better way to end on the topic of finding hope than that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.